BagTalk, March 23rd, 2021. Tuesday after the tournament ends, Friday through Monday. A very good tournament, very compelling, coming off of last year's just not having a tournament. We got big upsets, a lot of low scoring games, some big storylines. We got top teams going out early. The two conferences that people thought were going to star in this tournament are almost completely eliminated now. And maybe the Power 5 conference that people thought was going to have the least impact now has the most teams in the Sweet 16. We also have some big NFL free agent signings. The Giants spending a lot of money this week. The Colts continue to do nothing. The Bengals, I think, made the one move they had to make this year to put them in playoff contention. Washington continues to add offensive talent. The Steelers stayed cheap. And another saga in the Bears and Mitch Trubisky sort of ongoing. Were they right by Mitch or wrong by Mitch? We'll start in with March Madness. Obviously, the big upset of the first weekend was Oral Roberts advanced to the Sweet 16. They beat Ohio State in overtime, and they rallied from down 10 to beat Florida on Sunday. I think Oral Roberts is laying the blueprint, and I'll go more into Oral Roberts later. But I think they're kind of laying the blueprint for how to build your team as a lower level school, as they are being in the Summit. How to build your team to compete and have a chance to pull off those big upsets in the NCAA tournament. Because at Oral Roberts, nobody's going to care what happens from this point on. I mean, this team's going to survive for the rest of the history of the school. Just like Florida Gulf Coast hasn't done anything since 2015. But it's still Dunk City. That's the number one association with the school. They have a great baseball program. They continuously pump Major League Baseball players into Major League Baseball. But you ask the casual sports fan, and they'll say Dunk City. They beat Georgetown. And they advanced to the Sweet 16. They had Cromer and Fielder and Williams, and just that incredibly fun team to watch. And that leads us into our next point, or actually we'll stay on the upsets. Syracuse, the zone continues as it has for 40 years to just absolutely befuddle people. Buddy Boeheim, lights out shooting. I mean, he could be having one of those March Madness runs that people talk about for a very long time, like a Steph Curry run, like a Carmelo Anthony run. I mean, just continuing to put up points. They blow out San Diego State in a game in which San Diego State didn't score for about 19 minutes of game time. And then they just outplay West Virginia. West Virginia is able to cut it close in the second half, but Syracuse pulls back away on some sharp shooting by Buddy Boeheim. Jim Boeheim advances to another Sweet 16, solidifying himself, as if he already hasn't, as one of the best coaches in college basketball history. Syracuse, I think, is a team right on the outside of the blue blood category, just because they do only have one championship. However, a team that is firmly in the blue blood category, which is on their way back with another really good head coach, is the UCLA Bruins. They beat Michigan State in the first four in overtime. A big comeback that scored Michigan State 14-3 down the stretch. They beat... Who they beat as the 6th seed? I forget who they beat as the 6th seed, but they go on to beat Abilene Christian, who beat Texas, which is an easier path than I'm sure they were anticipating. Oh, they beat BYU. They beat BYU as a 6 seed. Matt Arms, former Purdue player, and BYU, 6 seed. UCLA beats them handily. And then they just blow Abilene Christian out of the water. Abilene Christian, who beat Texas. That was another big first-round upset to 3/14. And now Mick Cronin has this UCLA team that for a lot of the year was really good, but just had some absolute collapses down the stretch in some of these games that they played. I know they had the USC game they lost in the buzzer beater. They had another game earlier in the year, I think, where they were up by 10 with 2 minutes left to go and lost. But, I mean, they're one of the 4 Pac-12 teams in the Sweet 16. The Pac-12 only got 5 teams in. But Mick Cronin, as weird of a fit as he is at UCLA, just continuing to build this team. They're scrappy like his teams at Cincinnati were. Every loose ball you feel like they're going to get. Johnny Juzang is a great shooter from the outside. He's a guy that can carry the scoring load. I don't see any reason why UCLA can't beat Alabama this next game. I mean, they play good perimeter defense. Alabama relies a lot on shooting. Alabama has a cold night. UCLA can beat them. Oregon State, also in the Sweet 16. I didn't know anything about Oregon State coming to this tournament. I still really don't know anything about them. I haven't watched any of their games. I do love me some late night beefs from going back to college football. Betting on Oregon late night was huge. It's fun. I like the orange and black. But Wayne Tinkle is a hilarious name for their head coach. They play a zone much like Syracuse, and it gave Cade Cunningham and Oklahoma State fits. They beat Tennessee round 1 in a decent size upset because Tennessee was. It depended on how you felt about Tennessee because they had been so Jekyll and Hyde throughout the season. Some people were really high on Tennessee and they thought that they could make a run. Some people didn't. Oregon State beats them, and then they beat probably the best player in the tournament in Cade Cunningham, and they now advance for a Sweet 16 matchup, an 8 seed versus a 12 seed against Loyola Chicago. So we have 4 double-digit seeds in the Sweet 16. Oral Roberts a 15 seed, UCLA and Syracuse both 11 seeds, Oregon State a 12 seed. Now it's weird because 3 of those 4 teams are from Power 5 conferences, Syracuse in the ACC, UCLA and Oregon State in the Pac-12. And I think all of them have at least a puncher's chance of advancing. I mean, Oregon State has played like the best team in basketball for their last 10 games going through the Pac-12 tournament into this tournament. They've played absolutely great basketball. They've beaten, I think in the Pac-12 tournament they beat 3 tournament teams. I think they beat UCLA, Colorado, and Oregon on their way to the Pac-12 championship. Going into this tournament, the Big Ten and the Big 12 for the talk of the tournament, which conference is better, which conference is going to have more teams in the Sweet 16. Turns out they both have the same amount, only have one. Michigan from the Big 10 and Baylor from the Big 12. Those are the 2 conferences, 1 seeds. Baylor not covering against Hartford and then blowing out Wisconsin, just looking like just a far more athletic team than Wisconsin. And then Michigan handling their business against Texas Southern, and then really getting a fight out of LSU before eventually pulling away late in that game. Those 2 conferences were the ones that everybody's talking about, but the one people are talking about now that only got 5 teams in the tournament as opposed to the Big 10, who I think got 10, and the Big 12, who got 8, is the Pac-12, who only got 5 teams in. A lot of people thought they shouldn't have gotten that many teams in. A lot of people actually think UCLA should not have been in the tournament, and Oregon State was a bubble stealer. So going into this week, there's a real possible chance that the Pac-12 only got 3 teams in. However, now, sitting here March 23rd after the first week of the tournament, they have 4 teams in the Sweet 16. Oregon, USC, UCLA, and Oregon State. USC has looked dominant. They blow out Drake in the first round, and then they absolutely dismantle Kansas last night in the late game. Oregon got a first-round bye due to VCU testing positive for COVID. They advanced to play Iowa, and those teams go up and down the court, just non-stop offense between those two teams. Dana Altman, the head coach of Oregon, advances to another Sweet 16 as they eventually beat Iowa and Luka Garza to set up a matchup in the Sweet 16 that is a Pac-12 matchup against Oregon and USC. UCLA, as we talked about, playing Bama, and Oregon State playing Loyola Chicago. Was the Big Ten overrated going into this year? Also, back on the Pac-12, Colorado blows out Georgetown, beats them by 40 points. It was never close. They made a ton of threes. They end up losing to Colorado. But that was a good story. They're the only Pac-12 team so far that has lost. And I believe also the only Pac-12 team that has not covered the spread. Was the Big Ten overrated going into the season? Or going into the tournament? And it's something that you can't really see going into the tournament because we didn't have we didn't have the Maui Invitational. We didn't have a whole bunch of interconference play early on. So what you got was, much like they did in football this year, Big Ten teams building wins off each other based on how those teams were ranked in the preseason. And you have teams like Northwestern and Minnesota who were ranked at one point. So those were viewed as good wins at the time. And between IU beating Iowa twice, Illinois had some weird losses. Iowa also lost to Minnesota. Ohio State had a weird loss to Northwestern. You just kind of got the feeling, and Michigan kind of stood above all that throughout the year. I think they had one loss to Minnesota. But you kind of got the feeling that there's maybe some underlying overratedness in that conference. And you saw almost every team besides Michigan lost this weekend from the Big Ten. I think it's different than the Big 12 because the Big 12, Kansas, who was a high seed, had COVID problems going into the tournament. West Virginia ran into a red-hot Syracuse team. Whereas most of the Big Ten teams, they just got upset. From Tom Izzo losing to UCLA in the first four, to Ohio State just getting outplayed by Oral Roberts, to Illinois getting blown out by Loyola Chicago. The Big Ten definitely overrated this year. I do think Michigan's a legitimately good team. It just comes down to how Juwan Howard is able to coach through the rest of this tournament. And who is the best coach left in this tournament? You got the guy Juwan Howard is coaching against tomorrow or on Saturday. Or maybe he's not on Saturday. He's on Sunday. And it's Leonard Hamilton, who has been here before. One of the best coaches in basketball, Leonard Hamilton. You have Porter Moser at Loyola Chicago, who is now has a very good chance to take a mid-major program like Loyola Chicago to 2 Final Fours in his career. You have Jay Wright at Villanova, who's won 2 national championships, and looks like he has a Villanova team that I thought was dead with a chance to go to the Final Four if they could knock off Baylor. You have a Jim Boeheim versus Kelvin Sampson matchup, which, I mean, those are 2 coaches with a lot of wins in their careers. Jim Boeheim, obviously one of the winningest coaches of all time. Kelvin Sampson has been very successful at a lot of different universities. Then going to the other side of the bracket, Mark Few at Gonzaga, one of the best college basketball coaches of all time. Like we said, Leonard Hamilton, Mick Cronin versus Nate Oates, 2 very intense guys that'll be coaching against each other in Hinkle Fieldhouse as Alabama takes on UCLA. And then Dana Altman and Andy Enfield, who first rose to prominence as the head coach of that Dunk City Florida Gulf Coast team, who has the Mobley brothers at USC, who are absolutely incredible. One of the best 1-2 punches left in the